Hello, this is Jo, and today we are going to talk about 5 books that I would recommend for either maybe your first chapter book in Spanish or an early chapter book in Spanish, more easy reads before you jump into like full-on YA or adult novels. So I have 5 books here that are all translated into Spanish, so they are available in English. I find that a lot easier as a starting point because then you can read something that you are familiar with the story, or you can, read both at the same time, kind of refer back and forth. So eventually, I think it's great to read things that were natively written in Spanish, but when you're first starting out, I do think it's easier to read translations. First up, we have the book La Primera Regla del Punk, and this is a direct translation of the title in English, which is The First Rule of Punk. It is by Celia C. Perez. This is a very, very cute middle grade book that is about a young girl who is moving with her mother from, I believe, a town in Florida where she grew up and where her dad lives, to Chicago, and they're staying there for at least 2 years for her mom's career as a professor. Our main character, who goes by Malu for Maria Luisa, is obsessed with punk, which she got from her dad, and she also loves to make zines. So there are actually zines within the pages of this book, which is very fun. And so Malu's mother is of Mexican heritage and her dad is white. She relates to her dad in most ways, but she also obviously has this other side of her heritage, and there's aspects of that she really loves. And so she's figuring out how to navigate those things. This was just really, really cute. Very fun to read as Malu navigates, her new school and community in Chicago and is able to see a lot more merging of her two worlds, essentially. So, very fun read. Highly recommend. The next book is Esperanza Renace, which is the translation of Esperanza Rising. I know many, many people read this for school. I actually did not, but I did listen to it in Spanish, and it was a very, very enjoyable and relatively easy listen. I had not read it yet in English, so I think especially if you have read it before in English, this will be a very, very good one to start. I think it's kind of borderline between middle grade and young readers. So this is the story of Esperanza, who is Mexican. She is in kind of a relatively well-off family in Mexico that owns property. Something happens that I won't spoil, but she has a significantly less stable life situation after that, and she ends up having to come to the United States and work in a very exploitative situation with some members of her family. It is a very, very sad book. It addresses a lot of heavy topics, but it was also beautiful. I think the characters were really, really done really, really well. Fairly easy to understand. So I think it is a great choice regardless of whether you've read it before or not. Then we have El León, La Bruja y el Ropero, which is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in Spanish. This is kind of the first and most popular book in the Chronicles of Narnia. This was the first chapter book that I read in Spanish, and if you are familiar with the story, then I think it is a very, very good one to choose. It is written quite simply, and the chapters are pretty short, which is very good for reading. It makes it very manageable to get kind of a bite-sized piece of information. If you are not familiar with the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe tells the story of 4 siblings who have moved from London to the countryside during the war. So they are staying in this country estate, and they discover a kind of portal to another world, which is Narnia, and once in that other world, they kind of have to save one of their own who has gone astray and figure out how to navigate these, magical realms where there are animals that can talk, there are magical creatures, there's all kinds of goodness. I will just forewarn you, this is a very blatantly religious book. It is an allegory for the Bible, and so if that is something that will make you uncomfortable, then I would skip this one, but it is, you know, certainly a very popular children's story, so I think it is a solid choice. And next up we have El Alchemista, which is obviously The Alchemist. This is a pretty polarizing book. A lot of people absolutely love this book and a lot of people absolutely hate it. It is a kind of a fable. It's, I believe, a retelling of one of the Thousand Arabian Nights stories. It is the story of a shepherd from the hills of Spain who goes on kind of a mission or I can't think of the word that I want, but he goes on a journey to find a hidden treasure, and he is very, you know, dissatisfied with his life. He wants great things. He wants to achieve great things, to have great wealth, to have great experiences and great loves and everything. And so there's a lot of kind of philosophy, there's a lot of kind of spirituality of talking about how everything is connected, and there is some amount of kind of the law of attraction kind of thing. It's never stated that way, but it's kind of implied. That's why a lot of people love this, and that's why a lot of people hate it. So I think the thing that I concluded from this book is that it is a fable. It is not a guidebook for living your life, nor is it a statement of absolute truth about the world and how the world works. I think it was enjoyable for me to read, and also I found it very, very understandable. I would say this is one of the more difficult of the 5 that I have today, but I believe this was one of the first books that I read in Spanish prior to having read it in English, and I did find that I could understand the plot and everything. There were a lot of nuances that I missed out on, but I never had any problems following the plot. Also, bear in mind that there are multiple translations of this. I was listening to the audiobook as I was reading it, and my audiobook and this book were actually different translations. They were almost identical, and I didn't find one to be more difficult to understand than the other. But if you are partial to one style of Spanish or something like that, it might be worthwhile to look up whether there has been a translation done for, say, specifically Spain Spanish or Latin American Spanish or such, because there definitely are multiple translations for this. This was actually originally written in Portuguese. It is a Brazilian author, but it has been translated into like hundreds of languages, I think. So I really, really enjoyed this, and I will likely reread it at some point, and probably will read it in most languages that I learn, because I just found it to be a very useful tool. And our final book is Stamped by Ibram X. Kendi. This is the YA adaptation of the very long book Stamped from the Beginning, which is a nonfiction, very, very informative book all about the history of race in America. And so this is the young adult version translated into Spanish. So it's Stamped El Racismo, El Anti-Racismo y Tú. I really, really liked this book. I think it was the first nonfiction book I had read in Spanish, and I thought that it was written quite simply, but there were also a lot of words that I was able to learn based on like history, based on politics, you know, like the names of the different branches of government in the US. I had no idea what those were in Spanish. And the fortunate thing is, since those words were kind of put into use later in English, they are mostly derived from Latin, and so they actually are almost exactly the same. So that made this very easy to understand in a lot of points. And I think if you've done much or any reading on racism, the history of race in the US, they will probably be topics that are quite familiar to you. And even if not, I think this is a great intro to the topic. There were definitely some parts of it that are very like trying to be cool because it's written for kids, you know, like definitely some kind of more conversational tones in this that were probably I would have found slightly annoying in English, but you know, it didn't bother me at all. I think that this is a great choice, and again, probably something that I will reread. So those are 5 books that I think would be great choices for early, intermediate, late beginner reading in Spanish, or whenever you feel like you want to give them a try. So if you have any recommendations, definitely leave them in the comments so that people can, you know, get extra recommendations, and I will see you in the next video.